So, the Iranian military spokesperson just warned of devastating retaliation against any U.S. attacks on Iran's oil and energy infrastructure. He used the exact same doctrinal authority that Iran has deployed for decades against Israel, the United States, and every other adversary it labels an enemy. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' full right to proportional and asymmetric response, the rhetorical and operational weapon reserved exclusively for hostile states and aggressors, and he just aimed it squarely at the Trump administration's latest threats. The global oil market's reaction came within 6 hours, and it didn't just answer the warning, it triggered the largest single-day surge in crude oil prices since the 1973 embargo. $8 a barrel, in minutes, because of one sentence the spokesperson delivered to every capital on the planet. Energy analysts called it the most self-destructive escalation by Tehran since the 1979 revolution.
But here's the part that should make everyone in Washington physically ill. The spokesperson was warning about retaliation against strikes that hadn't even fully landed yet. Iran had already quietly repositioned its assets and prepared its countermeasures over the previous 90 days. The warning was a gun pointed at a defense that was already in place, and the spokesperson used it to convince the entire world that no energy supply chain passing through the Gulf is safe anymore. Let me walk you through what the Iranian military actually did. The statement dropped Monday morning, Tehran time, first on official IRGC channels, then amplified across X threads responding directly to Trump-era statements about degrading Iran's capabilities. It invoked the right of self-defense under any circumstance doctrine, the same authority Iran has used to justify attacks on Saudi Aramco in 2019, tanker seizures in the Strait of Hormuz, and drone swarms against U.S. bases. This is not a routine press release. This is not diplomatic language. This is the most powerful deterrent in Iran's arsenal. The same doctrine applied after the Soleimani strike, after the Natanz sabotage, after every Israeli airstrike on Iranian proxies. Every previous invocation targeted nations Tehran considers existential threats. And this time, the spokesperson aimed it at the United States, in the middle of the ongoing Iran-Israel war. The warning named 3 categories of retaliation. First, direct ballistic missile and drone strikes on U.S.-linked energy infrastructure inside Iran or in the Gulf. Second, activation of proxy forces, Houthis, Iraqi militias, Hezbollah logistics, to target oil tankers, pipelines, and export terminals. Third, the explicit threat to disrupt or close the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point carrying 21% of the world's daily oil supply. The total potential disruption cited, up to 5 million barrels per day taken offline within 48 hours. The legal justification was framed as an existential economic emergency, caused by U.S.-backed Israeli strikes that threaten Iran's sovereignty and revenue base. International law experts immediately pushed back. The doctrine requires an actual armed attack, not just Trump tweets or Israeli F-35 overflights. But the statement was immediate. No phase-in, no advanced diplomatic cable. Gulf shipping companies discovered what was happening when insurance premiums doubled overnight, and tanker captains received urgent rerouting alerts from their head offices. The intended effect was crystal clear. Force the United States and Israel to think twice before hitting Iranian oil fields, refineries, or export terminals. The threat was leverage. The energy infrastructure was the hostage. It assumed Washington had no contingency, and that global markets would freeze in fear. They assumed wrong. Because the IRGC spokesperson, a man who spent years inside the Quds Force Logistics Command learning exactly how energy flows through the Gulf, who watched the 2019 Aramco attacks in real time, who helped design the asymmetric warfare playbook, had been preparing for this exact moment for months. 6 hours after the statement landed, he appeared on state television with a second, even sharper message. He opened with a sentence that sucked the air out of every trading floor from Singapore to New York. I want to assure the Iranian people and the international community that Iran's energy position is secure. The threats issued by the United States this morning affect less than 15% of our export capacity, not the 85% the Americans believe they can target. The room went silent. He explained that Iranian intelligence, working with the National Iranian Oil Company, had assessed the probability of U.S.-Israeli strikes on energy sites as probable and for the previous 4 months. Once that assessment moved from possible to probable, Tehran quietly activated what it internally called Operation Persian Shield. Over 90 days, Iran dispersed storage, rerouted export pipelines, hardened key facilities with underground bunkers, prepositioned mobile missile launchers, and shifted a significant portion of oil sales to non-dollar, non-Western buyers. Every move was calibrated to avoid satellite detection spikes. Of the capacity Washington thought it could cripple, 70% had already been insulated or moved. What remained, the 15% deliberately left visible, was bait. Trump's threats had been aimed at a target that was no longer fully there. The gun was pointed at a vault that had been quietly reinforced and partially emptied by a command that knew the gun was coming. That was Move 1. Move 2 came within the hour. Iran announced it was placing all U.S.-flagged or U.S.-linked vessels in the Gulf under surveillance as legitimate targets. Estimated exposure, roughly $120 billion in direct and indirect assets, 12 times the visible Iranian capacity the U.S. had threatened. The hostage-taker had just discovered 2 things simultaneously. The original hostage had already escaped, and the hostage now held 12 times more hostages of its own. Move 3 was the move that broke the markets. The spokesperson held a third briefing aimed explicitly at the international community. If the United States and Israel attack the energy infrastructure of a sovereign nation, then no tanker, no pipeline, no terminal anywhere in the Gulf is safe. Then he delivered the sentence that will be studied in energy security textbooks for the next century. Your oil in the Strait of Hormuz is not cargo. It is a hostage. That sentence shattered the global energy system. Not because it was dramatic, because it was true. Move 4 was total energy decoupling, in real time. Iran activated rail and pipeline swaps with China, bypassing the Strait where possible. It opened emergency currency swaps with Russia, India, and Turkey for non-dollar oil trade. And it declared that future Iranian oil sales would be denominated in yuan, rubles, or rupees. 4 moves, 6 hours, capacity insulated, counter threat at 12-1, and one sentence telling the world their energy lifeline is now political leverage. The markets did not react to the original Iranian warning. That was absorbable once the 15% figure was revealed. The markets reacted to the global warning, to the realization that every nation dependent on Gulf crude had just been given a reason to question the safety of the entire supply chain. Brent crude jumped 8 lards in the first 90 minutes, the worst surge since the invasion of Kuwait. Insurance rates tripled, tanker stocks swung wildly, and major banks with energy exposure dropped between 7 and 11%. The reason was structural. If shipping companies begin rerouting around the Strait, or paying triple insurance, or shifting permanently to non-Gulf suppliers, the entire pricing system built on Gulf stability begins to crack. Saudi Aramco initiated an emergency review. China's Strategic Petroleum Reserve managers began drawdown talks. India's petroleum minister called an urgent cabinet meeting. The European Commission convened an emergency energy security session. Within 24 hours, roughly 2.1 million barrels per day of global supply was under review or rerouting protocols, the equivalent of $2.4 trillion in annualized energy flows. Suddenly in motion. Think about that ratio. The U.S. and Israel threatened strikes that would have hit perhaps 15% of Iranian capacity. Iran's response triggered the repricing or rerouting of the equivalent of $2.4 trillion in global energy value, nearly 160-1. The US dollar weakened 2.8% against a basket of currencies, the worst one-day drop in over 2 years. The decline wasn't driven by trade data. It was driven by the evaporation of trust, the invisible assumption that Gulf energy flows are safe from politics. That trust was the foundation on which cheap global oil and American strategic leverage rested for 8 decades. It was shattered in a single doctrinal statement. A senior OPEC Plus analyst with 40 years of experience put it bluntly in a Bloomberg interview that afternoon. "I've watched sanctions. I've watched wars. I've watched embargoes. Today, for the first time in those 40 years, I'm questioning whether the Gulf energy system can survive as a politically neutral artery." Threatening an ally's energy is one thing. Threatening the world's energy artery while you're already in a hot war is the strategic equivalent of burning your own house down to spite your neighbor, except the house you burn supplies heat to the entire planet. He revealed that his own advisory firm had begun recommending diversification away from Gulf exposure 12 months earlier. Not because they predicted this exact statement, but because the pattern of escalation made it clear the region was being transformed from a global service into a political battlefield. Political battlefields are poor long-term investments. The rest of the world is reaching the same conclusion today that the smart money reached a year ago. The difference is that they had 12 months to prepare. The market had 12 hours. His closing verdict cut to the foundation. Oil is worth whatever the world's trust in Gulf stability is worth. Today, that trust is worth significantly less than it was yesterday. Trust takes generations to build, and moments to destroy. This is the most self-destructive energy decision by any actor in this conflict since Saddam tried to burn Kuwait's fields. The global fallout exceeded everything. 11 major importing nations formally announced energy security reviews within 48 hours. Combined daily import volume under review, 4.3 million barrels. China accelerated its strategic reserve fill and expanded yuan-denominated purchase agreements with Russia and Iran. India fast-tracked its own East Coast refinery expansions to reduce Gulf dependence. The European Union dusted off emergency plans for a new Mediterranean energy corridor, bypassing the Strait entirely. And Iran, the country that was supposed to be brought to its knees by the mere threat of strikes, saw its domestic rial actually stabilize. As domestic oil stockpiles were redirected inward, and black market export premiums rose. The weapon hit the wrong target. It was designed to intimidate Iran. Iran's markets and proxies adapted. America's allies in the global economy paid the price. U.S. energy executives were in open revolt by Tuesday morning. One major Gulf operator reportedly told a senior administration official, "You just gave every buyer on Earth a reason to treat our supply chain as a war zone. Do you have any idea what that does to long-term contracts and investment?" The Strategic Petroleum Reserve discussions went into overdrive. American consumers watching pump prices climb in real time were not facing a panic-driven run. They were facing a rational, orderly, permanent repricing by the most sophisticated energy players on Earth. So here's where we stand. The Iranian spokesperson issued a doctrinal warning that could have hit 15% of Iran's export capacity. Iran had already insulated 85% and left the rest as visible bait. It then counter-threatened $120 billion in U.S.-linked Gulf assets, a 12-to-1 ratio. Then it told the world that every barrel moving through the Strait is now a hostage. That sentence triggered the repricing or rerouting of $2.4 trillion in global energy flows. Energy equities lost $280 billion in market cap in a single session. Oil jumped 8%. 11 major importers began diversification reviews, totaling 4.3 million barrels per day. China and India accelerated de-dollarization of energy trade. The Gulf's role as the world's neutral energy artery, the single most valuable strategic asset in global commerce, was questioned in a single statement. The threat was never about military strength alone. It was about trust, the invisible foundation on which cheap global energy and American strategic leverage rested for 8 decades. And it was destroyed in a single doctrinal warning, issued by a spokesperson who understood exactly what he was doing. He warned of retaliation and thought he was holding the world's energy hostage. The world discovered the Iranian vaults were already reinforced. The counter threat was 12 times larger. And one sentence echoed through every trading floor and every capital. Your oil in the Strait of Hormuz is not cargo. It is a hostage. That sentence will cost the global economy, and by extension the United States, more than any tariff, any sanction, any limited airstrike in history. Because it told the truth. And the truth, once spoken in the middle of a hot war, cannot be unspoken. The thread on X may have started with low engagement, but the sentence that came out of it is now moving markets worth trillions. One warning, one sentence, one hostage taken from the entire planet. And the vault, it turns out, was never as empty or as vulnerable as anyone in Washington believed.